begin with the extraordinary news conference in Washington, where President Trump spoke of his plan for the US to take over Gaza in what would be the most significant change in US policy towards the Middle East in decades. Addressing a news conference alongside the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Mr. Trump said he believes the entire territory should be redeveloped and Palestinians rehomed elsewhere. Our State Department correspondent Tom Bateman reports.
Shoulder to shoulder with the Israeli leader, President Trump set out his plan to, in his language, permanently resettle up to 2 million Palestinians out of Gaza and for the US to take over.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out.
Mr. Netanyahu defended the ideas, saying the U.S. president was an unconventional thinker.
He sees a different future for that piece of land that has been the focus of so much terrorism, so many attacks against us, so many trials and so many tribulations. He has a different idea, and I think it's worth paying attention to this.
But the proposals for Gaza, with tens of thousands killed, upend years of established US policy on the region and will be seen as flying in the face of international law. Arab countries have categorically rejected what Palestinians will see as a plan for their expulsion. Mr. Netanyahu's arrival at the White House came at a critical moment for the current phased Gaza truce. But the president was asked repeatedly about his calls for Egypt and Jordan to take Palestinians permanently. Not only does Mr. Trump's proposal amount to a fundamental shift in United States policy towards Israel and the Palestinians of unprecedented proportions, but it could also have more immediate implications for the ceasefire and hostage release discussions.
Netanyahu, you're a tyrant! Netanyahu!
Nearby, protesters called for Mr. Netanyahu's trial at the International Criminal Court, which last year issued arrest warrants for him, his defense minister, and a Hamas leader. They called Mr. Trump's idea a plan for ethnic cleansing.
Trump and his team can talk about displacing Palestinians, framing it as that Gaza is a destruction site within this real estate rhetoric. But at the end of the day, nothing will stop the Palestinians from remaining on their lands.
Being Mr. Trump's first foreign guest was already an honor for the Israeli leader. But it is the president's radical and highly contested plans for Gaza that are now sparking all the response. Tom Bateman, BBC News, Washington.
Well, our correspondent in Washington, Carl Nasman, described the surprise with which President Trump's announcement was greeted.
I think you could probably hear some of the jaws dropping over there in London. I mean, this really does just represent a fundamental, a drastic shift in U.S. policy. What we heard from Donald Trump there at that press conference, saying to not only move nearly 2 million Palestinians potentially permanently out of that area, but then for the U.S. to come in, kind of redevelop this land and then own it, in Donald Trump's words. This is just so far away from what we've heard from previous presidents. Of course, the last president, President Biden, was very clear about there needing to be a two-state solution in the region. You walked us through some of those critical reactions. Saudi Arabia, really a very important one. We've also heard from Hamas leadership saying that plans to relocate Gazans would be a recipe for chaos and tension in the region. We've also heard from the UN Palestinian ambassador saying similar words against this policy. We've been hearing, obviously, a lot of reaction within the U.S., politicians really sounding off. Nearly all Democrats who've spoken out about this have been against it. And there's a few Republicans, too, Republican senators, kind of criticizing this plan. One, Josh Hawley, a Republican senator, saying he didn't think it was the best use of United States resources to spend a bunch of money in Gaza. And, really, there are a lot of questions here. Of course, the legality of it in terms of international law is a big one. But then you look at the U.S. resources that it would take to, pull off this kind of plan. I mean, and we could be talking about U.S. military, troops, boots on the ground there. And that seems to fly in the face of what Donald Trump's, normal global policy is, which is America first. He's really been reticent to involve the U.S. in any sorts of conflicts. And this, of course, would, if this were to happen, would bring the U.S. much deeper into this conflict here.
Well, let's cross live now to Jerusalem and speak to our correspondent there, Yolande Nell. So, Yolande, just tell us, what's the reaction there in the region to this plan by President Trump?
Well, there's a senior Israeli official who was quoted in the media this morning saying this visit surpassed all of our expectations and dreams. Trump raised ingenious solutions to problems that have been with Israel ever since it was first established. There's a key far-right figure, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who has been advocating what he calls Gazan migration. He is now asking the Israeli Prime Minister to take this up as official government policy, and is encouraged by what he's heard, is now suggesting also that the occupied West Bank could be emptied of Palestinians too. Of course, there are many Israelis who recognise the dangers of what is being outlined here, not least the families of hostages who remain in Gaza and now worried about what happens with the ceasefire that was agreed by the Trump administration, acting as a key mediator between Israel and Hamas. On the Palestinian side, a Hamas spokesman called the Trump proposal ridiculous and absurd, pointing out it had the potential to ignite the region. And what many Palestinians I've spoken to feel is that they're shocked. They had some hope after the ceasefire deal that President Trump could send things into a different direction, a much more positive one. They feel this is a sort of fundamental and deliberate misunderstanding of what is at the heart of the Israel-Palestinian conflict, competing claims over the same land, what is seen as being the Holy Land, and they completely dismiss the idea that, any particular plot of land can be exchanged for another here.
Yolande, thank you. That's our Middle East correspondent, Yolande Nell, there in Jerusalem. Well, let's stay in Jerusalem and speak to Herb Kanan, senior contributing editor at the Jerusalem Post. Thank you for joining us on BBC News. So first of all, how feasible is this plan from President Trump? This would involve potentially the forced displacement of Gazans. Can that really happen?
Look, I think a wise man once said that with Donald Trump, you don't want to take him literally, but you want to take him seriously. And what does that mean in this context here? It means Trump said that he wants to have a U.S. protectorate over the Gaza Strip, and he wants to move the Gazans out. Is that literally good? What's going to happen down the line? I'm not sure. But take him seriously in what he's doing. And what he's doing is he is challenging the existing paradigms that have existed now for the last 3 decades that haven't worked. Right? Everybody's saying that, well, the only solution to the conflict here is a 2-state solution with the Palestinian state and the capital in East Jerusalem. He's saying no. He's saying there are other solutions, other possibilities, and I'm willing to look at those.
So what would those possibilities be? Because we understand the long-term plan for the president is to have an agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is clear that deal won't happen unless there is a 2-state solution.
Well, so he's widening the canvas, and he's saying there are other options on the table. One option is maybe the U.S. will move in and take over the Gaza Strip. Is this something that's going to happen tomorrow? Probably not, but it reshuffles the thinking. It reshuffles the thinking. As far as the Saudis saying that coming out and saying that this is a non-starter and there will only be normalization if there's a Palestinian state. I think when the Saudis start to sit down with Trump and they discuss things and they look at the leverage that the Americans have as well, that their attitudes might change a bit. So these are starting positions, not necessarily finishing positions. But the main thing, again, I think the main importance here is that there are new ideas on how to look at the conflict.
The president has spoken of himself as a peacemaker. So the idea of having Gaza under American control, potentially with American troops, is that something that he would really back in the long term even?
Look, again, it's tough to say. What we've seen historically with Trump is he puts out an idea. He puts like 1,000 elephants in the room. At the end of the day, he takes out 900 of those elephants, but there's still 100 elephants in there that change the room. And I think that's kind of the way to look at it here as well. Is the final picture going to be U.S. control of the Gaza Strip? not clear. But something has changed. Something's different. There's a different way of looking at other possibilities and bringing in other perspectives.
Herb Kanan from the Jerusalem Post, thank you for sharing your analysis here on BBC News.
Thank you.
Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.